Hey, what is up, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, political Pegasus here, bringing it back to you guys, Remnant from the Ashes, and today we'll be taking an all-new look at my Heart of the Night Stalker build. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into it. Alright, so the build here is going to be as followed. For the handgun, I'm using the submachine gun attached onto his weapon mod known as Swarm. For the long gun, I'm using a sniper rifle attached onto his weapon mod known as Hunter's Mark. For the melee weapon, I'm using the scrap sword. For the armor, I'm using the Night Stalker Shroud set, so Night Stalker helmet, Night Stalker trench coat, and Night Stalker pant. The Night Stalker set, if you don't know what it is just the skin for the Hunter set, so technically it is just the Hunter Shroud set, but skinned to look like Night Stalker. For the necklace, I'm using the Talisman of Anonymity, I think? Don't quote me on that. For the first ring, I'm using Heart Seeker, and for the second ring, I'm using Ring of the Mantis. Now, with all that being said, let's go ahead and dive into traits. Now, I say this in each and every one of my builds. At the end of the day, one of the primary resolutions I feel as though you should focus on when it comes to your traits is just every trait within the course of the game, because there is no set cap limit within this game, and getting more and more traits just makes the build that much better. But I do believe that there are 3 traits you can utilize to build your foundation when it comes to this build to kind of have a starting point, and these are the traits. So, one of the traits I feel that you do need to start out with is going to be Exploiter, weak spot damage increased by 20%. The next one is going to be Kingslayer, critical damage increased by 25%. And last but not least, it's going to be your Executioner, crit chance increased by 25%. Now, like I said, these are the 3 traits I recommend starting out for this particular build. However, I do recommend focusing on every trait within the course of the game at the end of the day, because it just makes your build that much better. But enough about that. Let's go ahead and get into some action. Alright, so we're playing on Earth here, and we are playing on Nightmare mode, and today I'll go over the general thoughts, ideas, and breakdown I have when it comes to making this build. So sit back, relax, and enjoy. So one of the reasons I ended up going for the submachine gun when it came to my handgun was for the fact that I wanted to deal close quarter damage in case people ended up rushing me, and I wanted to have a way of being able to deal with multiple groups at once in case I ended up getting rushed, as you see constantly throughout the course of this dungeon. The mod I ended up going with was the Swarm mod to deal with elites primarily, or bosses. It just made more sense because I wasn't able to capitalize on the full crit potential at the end of the day when bosses happen to be aggro towards me. So in other words, I had to utilize some other means to be able to consistently keep my damage up while being able to consistently stagger them to be able to get the appropriate crits that I was looking for, such as like headshots or weak spot damage or so on and so forth. It just ties in really nicely and it synergizes together really well. The reason I ended up doing the sniper rifle is because it does have a higher crit base percentage, because if you did not know, the build I was trying to go for was more of a crit based build at the end of the day, and utilizing the sniper rifle is really nice. It's a lot of fun. It's a really good single target based weapon. It has a lot of range tied into it and a really decent reload speed, so it feels pretty good at the end of the day, especially when paired up with this particular armor set known as the Night Stalker set. The Night Stalker set amplifies like weak spot damage and such. It doesn't really do too much for crit. However, I feel like crit and weak spot damage kind of go hand in hand a little bit when it comes to being able to get the best bang for your buck in regards to utility as well as overall damage output, just because of the fact that it's not as random as what all-out crit percentage could be, because when it comes to crit, there's a small percentage chance where you might not proc a crit. With the weak spot damage, you'll always proc weak spot damage if you're hitting their weak spot at the end of the day. In some cases, bosses don't have weak spots, depending on the boss that you end up fighting, but majority of them do throughout the course of the game, so it made sense to kind of do a mix in between, and I think it plays out really nice, and it synergy works really well. And at the end of the day, I think it's a little bit more consistent, and I'm all about consistency when it comes to my build, so when it comes down to it, I think it plays out nice. Reason I ended up doing was the Hunter's Mark was mainly because I like the vision. I really didn't need the increased crit percentage, honestly. It was really just for the vision. I like knowing ahead of time before I end up walking down a corridor if an elite's going to be there or how many enemies I'm taking on. It's really nice for positioning and setting yourself up before you actually end up engaging that encounter, just because of the fact that it gives you the opportunity to capitalize fully on that crit. Because one of the rings I am using is Ring of Mantis, which allows me to go about getting a I'm sorry, it's not Ring of Mantis, it's the Heart Seeker ring. It allows me to go about getting the 100% crit chance as long as the enemies aren't aggro to me, but it's kind of hard to do that if they spot me before I spot them. So utilizing the the mark, I can see them before they see me, and it just allows me to capitalize on the damage a lot more frequently than it would normally. It is a little bit harder to pull off a crit-based build in a close quarter dungeon at the end of the day, which is kind of unfortunate because I really want to capitalize on the full potential of this build for you guys. However, I think it does play out pretty well even in close quarter based combat. It's very lightweight, it's really fast, it's really efficient when it comes to being able to maneuver and reposition accordingly, just because of how lightweight the armor set happens to be. So it works out pretty nicely. You do get more, I will say potential with this build when it comes to playing it more out in the field and having more space to maneuver and to be able to position yourself accordingly, because then from there you can kind of control the battlefield a little bit easier than being forced into a tight corridor space. But at the end of the day, as you can see, even when backed up into a corner, it still plays out really well. And it works out pretty effectively. Having the scrap sword is really nice too, because I can cleave not just one enemy but two enemies at a time, and it let me go about dealing with the small little combatants that I wouldn't normally be able to deal with when it comes to just having the submachine gun, just because when I have the submachine gun, I have to reload at some point. So when I'm doing that 2-second reload animation, it's nice to be able to just mow them down with the sword and not have to worry about whether or not I'm going to get the reload off or I'm going to be stuck in an animation while doing so. So it pans out pretty nice. So overall, the synergy for the course of the build works out really good. The talisman I ended up going with actually works out really nicely as well, because it amplifies weak spot damage, which is really cool. So in that aspect, it ties really heavily into the armor. So if I end up getting a flick shot onto the headshot, applying weak spot damage and critical base value damage to that set target, I end up chunking their health down significantly, to the point of where literally they're not even a threat. I wasn't sure how this build was really going to pan out at the end of the day. I'm not a huge fan of crit, just because it's not as consistent, I feel as though. And it's not as flashy at the end of the day, in my personal opinion, and it requires a little bit more finesse and so on and so forth. I do feel like they do have a place, and I feel like they do have a lot of potential, as you can clearly see throughout the course of the gameplay. I'm pretty much one-tapping a lot of these guys. And if you're someone that likes to do like one-shot based builds, who like the idea of being able to do flick shots and just being able to one-tap enemies, this build's definitely for you at the end of the day. Works out really, really well, and it's really efficient. As you can see, I'm critting the boss for like 3,300 per shot. In some cases, I was doing 45 to about 5,000 per headshot, which is really, really nice when it comes to being able to progress through the early game pretty fast and efficiently. So it works out really nicely. It's also really good too for being able to play more of like a stealthy type of gameplay, because if you end up one-shotting on the enemies you're coming across out in the world, they won't alert other enemies, so you won't get that overwhelming ad spawn as long as you're playing cautiously, and this build really lets you go about doing that, which is really nice. But it's not in the sense of where you have to play slow either. You can actually still play really fast-paced, you can still go loud, still deal with AoE enemies, and still do a lot of single target based damage, all while maneuvering and repositioning. So it works out really, really well. And it's one of those things I really think you guys are going to enjoy at the end of the day. But let me know your thoughts down below in the comment section. And if you haven't already, don't forget to like, favorite, subscribe. And I hope to see you guys real soon. Later.